Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with the most controversial rabbi on the internet. I'm just kidding. Although you may be. I'm just saying it very, very well could be. I'm just kidding, man. You do a great job. Yeah, you do a good job in the fact that you take on stuff that a lot of people just really, it's not beneficial for them to take, except in private settings. You know what I mean? So,
because other people have an image. I have no image.
I do find it interesting, though. I have all of my rabbis' addresses except for yours, and now I think I know why. We don't want your address getting out to the public.
Oh, that's for sure. I get enough hate mail, as it is, enough trolls and everything else. So
that's funny.
Get the Karaites running around saying, the rabbi's this and you're saying that and you can't prove it and the Noahide's not in the Torah. So yeah, I'm trying to send all my hate mail to you. It doesn't work. That's it just keeps getting bounced back to me.
Yeah, I kind of created a fake email address for that, by the way.
A spam for me, it just goes backwards. Works backwards.
Oh, my. That's funny. So this is really a great one. I mean, last week we discussed an idea about atheism and agnosticism and kind of proof of God's existence, but now today's topic is going to be basically a proof of the divine authorship of the Torah. Of the actual first 5 books. And as you mentioned on our phone call, this will probably be more than just one episode. But definitely this would be a really good resource for people to have, because I know that's something that really pulls on the heart of people, especially people who have been, juked by Christianity. And they oftentimes, a lot of people who leave Christianity will oftentimes leave the entire Bible behind and just say, well, if the New Testament's that's not true, then the Old Testament's not true either. It can't be. And so I know literally a handful of people who are in that condition right now. So this show like this would be really good for them. So take it away, boss.
That's interesting. Why should that be? Why do you, if the New Testament's really based on the Old Testament, why should they throw that out?
It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me to a degree because they're told that the entire New Testament is divine, and then they find out it's not, and then it's like, well, they're told the Old Testament is divine too. Well, it's the same story, the same old mishmash. So it's like, none of this. It's all hogwash. Is what they think.
It's all a bunch of garbage.
Right.
I hear.
So have fun.
See ya. It's been a great show.
That's funny.
So yeah, we'll see. Last week, I took a few breaths and tried to get all the information out. There is a lot to speak about in different aspects, about divine authorship, and one thing we got to keep in mind is that most people aware that there are 80,000, more than 80,000 different religions. We probably only know, half a dozen or whatever. And, what singles out Judaism, more than anything else? Obvious question. How do we know, Judaism is true and, everything else is, false? So pretty much that premise, I'll leave to, Rabbi Skobac, and Rabbi Singer. That's not really the agenda. The agenda here, we want to see if within the Torah itself, because people claim, oh, it's the oral law this and the oral law that, and, show me in the Torah itself where there's clear-cut proof that it is, that it's true. So we're gonna show, hopefully, from a few different angles that we can see divine authorship, from within the Torah itself. We sort of spoke a little bit about it first, a few weeks back or about a month back or so, speaking about science. We're not really going to go into science, at the moment, but, maybe we'll hit part of that next week. But, if you look at the world, you look at this, the world of design that we, that we mentioned, you look at DNA, you look at all these things, 100%, it's going to show that there has to be a creator. Now, there's another step. We're not going to hit this now, but there's another step. Okay, if I understand there's a creator, then how do I know what he wants me to do? Right? So now we've seen from a scientific perspective, cosmological perspective, theological perspective, i.e. the world of design, And then I went berserk last week with Jewish history, running through Jewish history to show that, at least to try and show that the Jewish people exist absolutely 100% by miracle. Now, one of these proofs by themselves, you could, maybe you could say, well, knock this off a little bit or knock that off a little bit. But when you have so much information, right, from so many different sides, even we spoke from a moral perspective, right? Even from a moral perspective, it's hard to say, well, I hit it from, almost like a hexagon from 6 different sides. So now you're going to say, okay, I got 6 different sides. How can I really say, well, it's not true? I mean, we do have free will, that's obvious, but, we look at, a lot of different things, we get a glimpse of how this works. Okay, so what's going to be the first thing, is going to be that according to the Torah, right? Torah tells me more than 3,320 years ago, Torah tells me that the Jewish people come to Mount Sinai, right? Mount Sinai, 49 days after the Exodus from Egypt, right? Mount Sinai, the Jews become a nation. They get the Torah, right? So as the story goes, they come out of Egypt. They 49 days, 7 weeks, stood at Mount Sinai. Now at Mount Sinai, what happened? Now, if you're a conservative Jew, what does the conservative movement say? Something happened, we're not sure. Well, the Torah tells me clear. The Torah says it's thunder, there's lightning, the entire Jewish nation is there. Now, let's make a calculation. 20% of the Jews end up coming out of Egypt. 80% die either through the plague of darkness, over time, whatever it is. So the Torah tells me there are 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. Now, if you figure that, a woman, when she gave birth, to 6 kids at one time, right, as the Medrash says. So we're talking almost 2 to 3 million people. Now, when you say that God spoke to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, millions of people were there. In other words, they saw God speak to Moshe. Whatever that scene was, they were on that level, at least by the first 2 of the 10 commandments. There's a discussion whether it was they heard all the 10 commandments or just the first 2, because the experience was so great, right? What happened? They died. So God had to bring them back. So, okay, after the first time they came back, they said, okay, well, here's the second one. Second one, they all die. They come back again. They say, Mo, enough. You hear, God will speak to you. Too much of an experience for us. You tell us what God said. Now, nobody disputes, not the Christians, not the Muslims. Again, we're not going to go into the fallacies of the Christians, the Muslims, right? We're not interested. They 100% agree that the Jewish people heard the Torah at Mount Sinai. Remember, I had some Mormons come to my door when I was in South America, claim that the biggest group of Mormons outside of Salt Lake City, right, in Utah, is in Chile, in Santiago. I don't know exactly how they got there. But one of the things they were trying to convince me of was what a great thing that John Smith found this Book of Mormon in a cave 200 years. So I said, did you read the Bible? They said, yeah, why? I said, did you read, the book of Exodus, chapter 19, chapter 20? Jewish people get the Torah in front of 3 million people. God gives it in front of 3 million people.
Can you
yeah.
Can you show us with Torah where the proof would be that Hashem did? I've seen it and I've heard the midrash on it, but it'd be nice to kind of have it on this video. How
600,000 men?
No. The Hashem had given 2 of the commandments to them, and that at the point they said.
That's by the Medrash. It's not directly in the Torah.
Okay, gotcha.
It just says God spoke the 10 commandments. That's what it says. Exodus chapter 20. Chapter 20 said God spoke to Moshe, saying, all these, these 10 commandments. So seemingly he spoke to Moshe. All the people were there. right? But the Medrash says they were all there, they all heard, but there was a problem. They couldn't take the experience, right? It's not directly in the Torah. It's oral law. Okay. That's an oral law.
Okay.
So here they heard the first of the 10 commandments or all of them, whatever it is, but make no mistake, the Torah makes clear. God spoke to the Jewish people. The Jewish people were there. It wasn't like, all these other so-called religions, there was no witnesses. All of a sudden Muhammad comes, his flight to Mecca to Medina, right? The prophet Gabriel comes to him, whatever. Who was there? There are no witnesses. He makes the claim, right? In the New Testament, all kinds of claims. There's no witnesses. The Jewish people come, they say, Nasev and Ishma, we'll hear, we'll do, whatever the Torah says. They come to Mount Sinai, and they are there. In other words, the Moshe Rabbeinu, this is one very good proof that if Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to make it up generations later, they're going to say, what are you talking about? You mentioned all these mitzvahs, all these different things, and it goes back to Mount Sinai. Who was at Mount Sinai, right? Nobody was at Mount Sinai. I said, no, it says in the book, all these people were at Mount Sinai because it was passed down generation to generation. There are eyewitnesses, right? So those eyewitnesses passed it down. A grandfather passed it down to his grandkids. His grandkids passed it down to his grandkids. Now people think, come on, that's 3,200 years ago. That's a big leap of faith. So I'll give an example. You look at a Passover Seder. What used to be a Passover Seder. There used to be 4 generations at the Passover Seder. There used to be the youngest child. There used to be the father. Used to be the grandfather. Used to be the great-grandfather. So now you're going to say, how does that work? So let's say someone gets married in their early 20s, right? By the time they're 40, early 40s, they could have grandkids, right? By the time they're 60, they could be great-grandparents, right? It's not such a wild idea, certainly in the ultra-Orthodox community, that certainly can be the case. So now you have 4 generations at this Passover Seder. Now you have to remember, the great-grandfather at that Seder at one time was the youngest child. Now, if he's the youngest child, that means he probably saw his great-grandfather. So that's an 80-year swing, right? So now, how many of those generations, of those 4 generations do you need to get back to Mount Sinai? All you need is 80 generations. We'll make it, so you're going to say 80 generations. That's a tremendous thing. Okay, so let's make it a little more graphic. You take the great-grandfather, he's 80 years old, right? He saw his grandfather 80 years before that. Right? Let's say that's 160 years. That's 80 years before. And his grandfather saw his so you're going back more than 150 years. And then that great-grandfather saw his great-grandfather going back another 80, almost 100 years. So now you're almost in the 1700s, right? That's not so far back. All right, then you just keep going back. So those generations, are there, are there to show not only that, but, what happened at Mount Sinai? God gave the Torah, right? So when God gave the Torah, what are they commemorating at this Passover Seder? I don't want to get too sidetracked, but what are they commemorating? They're commemorating they're commemorating the exodus from Egypt. Now, how did they know the exodus from Egypt? Now, we know sociologically, through papyrus, through other things, we know the Jewish people were in Egypt. We know the Jewish people came out, right? That we mentioned. That we spoke about. So we know that's clear cut. So what happened after they came out? So after they came out, they went to Mount Sinai. But a lot of things are dependent that we do today based on one event in history. What's that one event? That one event is coming out of Egypt. Now, so the Torah tells me on the 15th of Nisan, right? On the 15th of Nisan, so you're going to eat matzah. Right? It's a 7-day holiday. Now, how do we know that's true? Because someone sat at a Passover Seder. Even secular Jews, probably 95% of all secular Jews have sit every year. It might be rub-a-dub-dub, let's eat. They'll go through the story very quickly. It may be very superficial, but they speak about the Exodus from Egypt. Now, who's telling the story? The father's telling the son. Because the Torah tells me, you're going to tell your son on that day. What's that day? The 15th of Nisan. If it's on the 15th of Nisan, what happened? That's when we came out of Egypt. Okay, so if you go anywhere in the world, anywhere in the world on the 15th of Nisan, you're going to see Jews sitting around a table, 3 matzahs, 4 cups of wine, bitter herbs, the cup of Elijah, the whole 9 yards. And what are they doing? They're telling over the story. Right? So you're going to say, well, how do I know the story's true? Because your father told you. And his father told him. Now, normally, probably not for this generation, but normally a parent would never lie to a kid, right? Maybe this generation's different, right? But you have one event passed down, right? Forget about oral law. It's passed down. We sit down in a Passover Seder commemorating what happened. Well, if it didn't happen, why are we doing it? So some people say, well, it's a myth. Well, it's this. It's a custom. But don't we know it happened? So don't have to get sidetracked here. So back to Mount Sinai. Millions of people saw God in Moshe Rabbeinu having a conversation, right? It's not like they heard 2 days later, a week later, a month later, it was hearsay. This person said something, they heard something in the bathroom, who knows what. In the end, everybody saw. Right? How it envisioned itself. Okay. That's the whole discussion. What does it mean? God spoke and they saw it, right? It's a whole discussion. But in general, they saw a conversation between Moshe and God. So God comes to the third commandment, certainly as we read in the Torah. And what happens? They were scared, right? They were scared, but they what did the Jewish people say? They told Moshe, okay, you listen, and you give us what God said. Because in essence, they don't need any proof. They're already there by the mountain. They already know everything that they've gone through. So the first line of defense is that all other major quote unquote religions agree to this fact. They agree to the fact that God spoke. No other religion, and again, we're not here to disprove them because that's not really the point here, right? But no other religion makes such a claim. And not only that, their claim is not based on eyewitnesses, right? This is an absolute crucial thing. If you tell me, okay, you had a couple eyewitnesses, it's one thing. But if you tell me you have millions of witnesses, right? That goes without saying, right? That is a tremendous thing. It's not just, this is a leap of faith. Most of the known world, agrees to such a thing. The only question is going to be, why don't I have to hold of it? Why the Jewish people aren't chosen, right? Whatever the case is. So now the question is going to be, right? So that's one aspect, right? To show that 100% this is not a leap of faith, because we're going to see in a number of places, it tells me that you have to know that God exists. You have to know that the Torah exists. By the Christians, if there are issues, historical inaccuracies, other things, it's all a leap of faith, right? 100% it's all a leap of faith. By Judaism, the mitzvah to believe in God, is what? Is to know, is to understand through knowledge. Where do I know it from? I know it from Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. Right? It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of bondage, i.e., took you out of Egypt. Now, so the beginning here is that God gives us something that we know, right? He's gonna pass it down. He's gonna pass it down to Moshe. Now, the idea is over here that it has to be something that is absolute. In other words, it's something that you cannot find a mistake. If you find a mistake, like these other so-called religions, if you find a mistake, then it cannot be divine. Right? The conservative movement, many believe it's 4 authors and a redactor. Right? The documentary hypothesis. Reform movement, I don't even know if they believe in God at all. Right? But they certainly don't believe, the same God we believe in, no question about it. So the question would be, okay, right, how can, you can't rely on something, You can't rely on something if what? If there's human error. Now, someone can say, well, how do I, that may be true, but how do I know, how do I know it's absolutely true? Right? That's going to be the question. So the Torah itself, we understand came before everything else. Now, came before Christianity, came before Islam, 900 years, before Buddhism and all that. One question you have to ask on all these other, so-called religions is no one makes the same claim. We see by the flood, there's a Babylonian story, right? That is similar to the flood. There are other seemingly similar things, in these other books that are brought down in the Torah, but obviously there are issues, right? There are definite issues with them. There are definite inaccuracies, but no one's ever made the claim, right? And this is again, is part of the first point here, is that no one has ever made such a claim that God spoke to an entire nation, right? That has never been done. Now, we have to remember that Torah is a combination of written law and oral law. Now, with that, you can't understand any of the 613 commandments without reviewing oral law. So oral law we've definitely spoken about. We've definitely beaten it like a dead horse, no question, right? So what we see is that it's going to need explanation. Now, the human body, right? Why is the Torah given 613 commandments, right? Let's see that for a second. 613 commandments. How many bones are in the body, right? There's 248 organs, 365 ligaments, right? 248, 365, right? We get to 613, right? So we have 248 positive commands, 365 negative commands, both encompass the entire Torah. Now, the Torah says, right? Torah says that let's say better, it says in the Zohar that the Torah came. When the Torah came, God created the world based on reviewing the blueprint of what the Torah is. So what does Torah actually mean? Torah means it is a book of instruction. It really means to instruct, right? How to get married, how to raise children, right? All these different things. So what do I say? It's all one unit by Christianity. Many different books, translations, other things, etc. So comes the Torah. It's all one, it's all one unit. So what do we have over here? Moshe Rabbeinu comes to millions of people, right? He comes to millions of people and he says, okay, I have a book and I want you to live according to this book. Now, does it make sense? We have to see, according to human logic. We're not going to use anything fancy here. Does it make sense according to human logic? All right, so what are we going to say over here? The Torah itself, 100% goes against human logic. Why does it go against human logic? Because 80% of it does not make any sense. Right? We're gonna see why this has to be an aspect of why it is divine. Right? First of all, the entire concept of sacrifices. People have a tremendous difficulty with sacrifices. If a person makes a sin, right? If God forbid somebody sins, if the temple in Jerusalem existed, what would they do? They'd have to get an animal, right? Whatever it is, you get a cow, get a bird, whatever the sacrifice is, you got to bring it. It's got to bring it to Jerusalem. We're going to take off time, all these other things. Go to Jerusalem, you got to sacrifice it. It's all the PETA activists or pet activists, whatever you call them, right? What they're going to jump up and down and say, hey, it's not fair. What did this animal do? You sinned. It's your issue. Why in the world are you bringing this cow or this bird or this dove or who knows what? Why in the world are you bringing the sacrifice? It's not fair, right? That's what they claim. And certainly, many secular Jews will say, what? We're going to go, when the next temple, if it's going to be rebuilt, we're going to go back to sacrifices? Come on, that's medieval. Doesn't make sense. These poor animals. These poor animals don't deserve it. Why in the world we go backwards, in time, right? One commandment in the Torah tells me, if I see a bird in a nest, right? If I see a bird in a nest, it's hovering over its eggs. What do? You push away the mother bird, you take the eggs, right? Egg drop soup. I don't know. Sounds kind of tasty, right? Why not? And you take the eggs, and you push away the mother bird, and you take the eggs. Why isn't that an act of cruelty? Sounds like a total act of cruelty. Who in their right mind, if they're going to give a book and they say, these are the laws I want you to keep, and one of them's going to be, you got to punch the mother bird in the face, my language, go bam, get rid of the mother bird and take the eggs. You don't think that's pain for the mother bird? Of course, right? Isn't that an act of cruelty? People say, come on, that doesn't make any sense. That is cruel. That is an act of cruelty.
Rabbi, I have a thought on that myself. And so if you go and shoo the bird away, the way I understood it was shoo the bird away, make it fly away. You don't just move it aside and grab its eggs in front of it, but you shoo the bird completely away so it can't even. It's like you startle the bird and it leaves, and then you take the eggs and the bird comes back and all of a sudden the bird is like confused and doesn't know what happened to the eggs. I think. That's the kind of how I understand. And to me, in that case, that would make a lot more sense. Now, I know that rule does not apply to people who actually raise like chickens and eggs, because that's a whole different concept. But
the problem is they know where they know where their nest is. It's not like it's not okay. You push them away, they go away, but they know where they.
Right,
I would assume if they come back and their eggs aren't there, then they know something happened.
Right, but it'd be different. Like for example, the whole idea of if you meet a bear in the woods, not a joke, a mother bear, right? There's a chance that bear's not going to mess with you. But you mess with the cubs, all of a sudden now the bear is going to be like, tear you to shreds, right? So it's like if the bear's cubs turn up missing, she's going to be looking for her bears or whatever. But if she sees you messing with them, then all of a sudden you're causing trauma that's even way beyond what the bear would have experienced otherwise. So I think that's kind of the connection with the bird.
Right. So that's that definitely makes sense, except for the fact that it's a decree that we don't really understand. There's a great rabbi of the last generation, Rabbi Yosef of blessed memory, when he did this mitzvah, he had like tears in his eyes, pushing away the mother bird, saying, this is a decree, this is what God wants me to do, and whatever. So, I got to be sensitive to a certain extent, but in the end, it's a divine decree. Just like once a year, you clean your house from bread, any crumbs, any chametz, any leavened product, anything made from the five kinds of grain. And then you have to eat matzah like in 35 pounds in like 40 seconds and whistle Dixie at the end. Come to my house, it'll be, quite enjoyable experience. Regardless, doesn't make sense either, right? Why in the world all of a sudden, your normal food that you eat, cake, cookies, all these things, all of a sudden it's a divine decree. Remember what happened in Egypt. Okay, now we're getting, more definitions a little bit. But in general, why in the world we do that, right? It's not logical. Now, there are parts of the Torah, that are logical, that do make sense. Don't kill, don't steal. Obviously there are a lot of a lot of definitions over here. What does it mean to steal? Does this apply? Does that apply? But in general, it's not everything, doesn't make sense. But a person has to understand also, when you're learning this and you see, let's say, my mind understands business more than anything else, right? Laws of damages. That's what we really understand, probably better than most things. And when you look at the laws of damages in the Torah, it's unbelievably complex. And a lot of our ideas of what we think should be and what the law should be, totally out the window. Why is it totally out the window? Because the Torah tells me that's not the law. That's not how it applies. This is how it applies. I remember once going through something and like my brain was just like pounding and pounding. So I went to one of my rabbis. I said, I don't understand. I said, I understand what this says. Right? I understand this. I understand that. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. And this is supposed to be something that's supposed to be, that should be, in the front of my mind that I understand. So one of the rabbis explained, he says, you have to remember this is divine. Don't just say, well, this is business and this person did this and this other person did that. Okay, so now I have to evaluate, what happened, and all that. But it's divine. So there are a lot of things, as we mentioned, a lot of things don't make any sense, right? That doesn't make any rational sense. Now, if God forbid Moshe Rabbeinu is a fake, right? If he would be a fake and he's trying to scam everybody, why in the world would he make life so difficult? You got to keep this, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? And you know what? Every month you have to separate from your wife. Oh, that's beautiful, Moshe. Where do I sign up? The women love that. Men not gonna love that. They're like, great. He could be killed. What are you, out of your mind? I'm gonna follow this book. I can't be with my wife whenever I want. What are you, a crackpot? Come on. If he wanted to show, that it was fake, he could have made it 10 times easier. Right? He would have given us half a dozen mitzvahs. That's it. Why would he given us 613 and sacrifices and blood, and you can't eat certain animals and, you can't mix milk and meat. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Doesn't make any sense either. You got milk, you got meat, right? Both are permissible, right? If they are permissible, right? Both are kosher, let's say. I put them together. I put them in a pot. I stir it up on the, on my oven. Put it in my oven on my stovetop. Makes it forbidden. Why does it make it forbidden? Doesn't make any sense, right? So why in the world, if he's going to scam something, right? Why in the world is he going to make it so incredibly difficult, right? So again, this book, the only book that has eyewitnesses, right? And also you have miracles, right? You have a lot of miracles in the Torah, right? The book of Exodus speaks about the miracles that happen in Egypt, right? And totally against, that also doesn't make any sense, right? You got blood, frogs, whatever we saw from the papyrus, that it seemed like there's all these calamities that happen. It's always interesting. I just saw something recently where someone explained, the Exodus from Egypt. Right? How do you explain the Exodus from Egypt? The fact that, the Jews go through the water, the water's like suspended animation. They walk through, the Egyptians come through, and then the Jews go out and it falls. Some say, well, that could have happened at high tide. So I saw something recently where someone said, you don't understand. If you look at what happened to the Jews when they were coming through the sea, the water stopped. That's not high tide. The water stopped for a certain amount of time, right? It was like suspended animation on both sides, and they walked through. It wasn't like it was just high tide or whatever. How it doesn't last that long, right? You can't just pass through it and that's it, right? It's not going to explain it across the board. Also, you got every firstborn that's killed in Egypt, right? They fall and they die. You got the plagues. You got all these things. And God distinguishes between the Jews and non-Jews, between the Jews and the Egyptians. So now we get all these things Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, right? You got to do this, you can't do this. You got to do that, you can't do that. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, I got a book, right? God came to me and he said, this is what you have to do, right? But you're going to ask, okay, you want me to do this, but the problem is it says we're in Egypt. I'm not in Egypt. I don't live in Egypt. You're talking centuries later. We weren't there, right? I'm not living there. So how do I know that happened? Right? It says God split the ocean. I wasn't there. I never heard such a thing, right? We're 3,000 years later, right? I never saw such a thing. I know how to swim in the ocean, right? I know how to throw rocks at people, other things. How do I know, right? How do I know it's the way that God said it? How do I know there was manna, right? How do I know this great manna fell from heaven, right? And it was whatever you wanted, whatever the taste was that you thought it was or that you wanted, all these different things. So you could say, well, maybe a little birdie told him, maybe, something else. But again, how does Moshe Rabbeinu and this is one of the 13 principles, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy is greater than all the other prophets, right? First of all, there are different aspects of prophecy. We don't necessarily go into prophecy. Point is, God says he is my true prophet, right? In other words, I speak to him face to face, not like any other prophet or whatever. So how do I know? Because God said in front of all the nation. This is what happened at Mount Sinai. When God spoke to Moshe, and Moshe said, this is what God said, right? So he wasn't doing it for himself. This is what God said. If this is what God said, you have to believe, right? You have to believe this is what he's saying, and this is what I have to keep, right? So something like that, if it's something where, he's going to say, a little birdie told me, but there are no witnesses, that's going to be highly problematic. If it's done in front of the entire nation, then there are no other questions, right? There's a conversation between God and Moshe Rabbeinu, and everybody witnessed it. Everybody was on that level to be able to witness it. So what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Moshe Rabbeinu says, I had this conversation with God, and this is what God said, right? God told me I'm going to be the leader, blah, 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 right? Now, if that didn't happen, you say, well, I never heard such a thing, right? If I never heard such a thing, why should I listen to you? Where is your authority? So now it gets more complicated. Why does it get more complicated? So we'll give a few examples. One example is that for thousands and thousands of them, they were married to their aunts. So let's say your father's 40, and and his niece is 20, or let's say he's got a younger sister, and she's 18. You want to marry her, right? You want to marry your niece, right? No problem, according to the Torah. Seemingly, there's no problem, right? Cousins got married, no problem, not an issue, right? So till this day, they're cousins, they're first cousins or whatever that get married. So why not buy an aunt, right? An aunt, and a nephew, or whatever the case is. So there's a major issue over here. Why? Because thousands of these Jews were married to their aunts. Comes along Moshe Rabbeinu comes along and he says, you know what? You can't marry your aunt. That's forbidden. But you know what? Moshe's mother was married to her uncle. This is a little bit problematic, right? This whole thing is a little bit problematic. So you had thousands of people. You have to remember, a lot of people had a lot of kids. They had, we mentioned a woman give birth, first time birth is 6 kids. Next time, she could have 10, 12 kids, more, right? So now you get all these kids, and Moshe Rabbeinu now comes along and says, okay, got more laws to teach. Anyone married to their aunts, right? That type of relationship, you'll have to separate. Tens of thousands of people. So if Moshe Rabbeinu comes and says that, he is dead. They're going to say, what, are you kidding? You're going to tell us we can't stay married? We got all these kids, we're going to have grandkids and whatever, we're going to have to get divorced? Like, you got to be off your cotton picking head, right? That's certainly what I would say. How in the world are they going to cooperate with Moshe himself? They would have killed him. There would have been an insurrection, right? There would have been, military coup. That's it. They said, Moshe, it was a good try. Good luck. Boom. They cast him in the sea. It's finished, right? That's it. So they would definitely 100% resist him. But what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu gives them the Torah, and he explains the Torah, right? That's what he's doing in the desert. And then he tells them what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. So what happens? They accept it overnight. And they follow the instructions generation to generation. Now, all you needed was one person to say, again, all these things, how do I know, they really happened, right? You really want me to divorce my wife? What are you kidding? And Moshe Rabbeinu's father, obviously, right? Married to his niece, right? Married to his aunt. So if that's the case, Moshe Rabbeinu was in trouble, right? He goes against his own, goes against his own parents. Now, it gets better, because when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to the mountain, what does he tell them? He tells them, I want you to prepare. I want you to prepare. We're going to get the Torah. So 3 days before, God tells them to prepare, and he says they have to cleanse themselves in water, right? They have to go to the mikveh. They have to cleanse themselves in water. They can't touch their wives to prepare for the acceptance of the Torah. So here we got 7 weeks after the exodus from Egypt. They prepare meat, slaughter cows, sheep, right? Prepare tons of meat to feed millions of people. Moshe brings them the Torah, right? Moshe brings them the Torah. What holiday are we talking about? Shavuos. Now they find out, you know what? There's an idea of ritual slaughter. So all the killing of the animals, thousands, millions of dollars worth of meat, gone. Thrown overboard. Oh, gotta give it to the non-Jews. Can't eat it. Totally forbidden. Right? So they didn't know the laws of slaughtering yet. And so what happened? So that's why one of the reasons that we eat dairy products on Shavuos, because they didn't have any kosher pots and pans. Everything, they had to kosher or basically throw out, get new ones or whatever, make new ones, whatever the case was. And all those animals, all that meat, gonzo. They didn't have any time to prepare, right? They didn't have any time to, slaughter animals. You needed salt, you needed the blood to come out. There's no time, right? So that's the reason why we eat dairy. But imagine, Moshe's coming down from the mountain. He's telling them, okay, we're gonna have this great holiday in Shavuos. They're like, great, we got all this meat, great shish kebab, all this stuff, tremendous. And he says no. And he says, nope, can't eat it. It's treif, it's not kosher. Not kosher because that's what God told me, right? Again, they have all this meat, stored away. They're gonna have a great time. Boom, right? They get slaughtered over here. No pun intended, right? So okay, so now you have that. You get to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 4. Torah says that God says to the Jews one day, you're not going to be faithful to me, and you're not going to keep my laws. And what does God say? I'm going to spread you across the nations, and you'll be spread across the continent. You'll be spread all over the world. I'm going to direct you to all these different places. Now, God says over there, you're not allowed to go after false gods. So it says over there that you're not allowed to follow, right, a religion that is of wood of stone or stone. What is wood? Christianity. What is stone? Stone represents the symbol of Islam, i.e. the stone in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca. Now, very interesting, because this is 1,300 years before Christianity, 2,000 years before Islam. Now, when we talk about worshiping false religions, how in the world is the Torah going to make such a claim if these things didn't exist? Now you're going to say, how do you know? How do you know that's what it's talking about? Okay, so we have oral law, right? We have oral law to explain it, but that's what it says, right? Got another example, right? Another example, it says, be very careful. This is what the Karaites have an issue with. And it says, be very careful. Do not modify the Torah. Do not add one word, one letter. Don't erase one letter, right? This is written again, Deuteronomy chapter 4. Now, over the generations, we certainly know that there's going to be a penalty, a severe punishment. Obviously, you can't make up a new religion, right? You can't just add and subtract. Adding and subtracting, which we mentioned a number of times, means if I add an extra sitzes to my sitzes, if I add another compartment to my tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them, that's going to be an issue, right? That for sure is going to be an issue. Or I take one off. That's adding or subtracting. So they had to be very careful when they're writing all this down, etc., that they have to copy it in the original way. Now, once every 7 years, the king or the leaders gather together. to go over the Torah to make sure there weren't any mistakes, right? And that they match. We even see by the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see that today, that, that came from way back, and that there are no discrepancies. There are some things where, spellings may be a little bit off. There's like a hey instead of a vav, or a hey instead of an aleph, or something like that. But that, that's not a discrepancy, because it doesn't change the meaning of the text, right? It just means, someone, when they wrote it, they made a mistake in copying it. If it would be something where it would be a difference in the word itself, and there's a difference in the meaning, okay, right? That'd be something else. But we're not talking about that. So over here, what happens? So they match their Torah to the majority, right? They go obviously according to the majority. It says in Exodus chapter 23, verse 2. And if they have a mistake, they have to fix it, because otherwise you're going to have an issue. That mistake will go in other Torahs, and that'll go in other Torahs, and you'll have that same mistake. So now, when the Jews go back, you go back in history, what does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me that God created Adam from four corners of the earth, right, in the beginning of the book of Genesis. And who saw, right? Who heard the voice of God speaking to him from the fire with magic, strong hands, all these other things, whatever? Who saw it? Did it ever happen? Etc. That's why when the Torah says, what's the mitzvah we mentioned? What's the mitzvah to believe in God? Book of Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, that God took us out of the land of Egypt, right? I am the Lord your God, took you out of the land of Egypt. Now, why didn't the Torah there say, because God created the world? That would have made a much better, probably a much bigger impression, on everybody else, by saying, you know what? God created the entire world. The only question was, who was there, right? Did anybody witness God creating the world except for him? No, right? But how do people know? How do we know that God is God? Because he took us out of Egypt, right? And that is something God intervened in history. That we have proof for. This, okay, I'm not saying God didn't create the world, God forbid. Obviously, he created the world, right? Just no one was there. No one was there as a witness, right? So what is an interesting thing? That God makes a promise. God makes a promise, and he says that even if many people, let's say, would come later and have some sort of, and try and fake a beginning of a new religion. They say, this angel came to me and he told me, and whatever, it makes this whole religion, whatever it is. So within the Torah itself, God says, I'm going to make sure these stories are going to be a story of one individual. They're not going to be a story of a mass thing like the Torah itself, right? Why? Because even though a person can lie, a person can bring two phony witnesses to back up your story, right? God says no. He says, I'm never going to let it happen, and I don't want you to confuse my nation with anyone else. So therefore, there's going to be one event. This one event is going to be where the Jews receive the Torah, and the entire world is going to know that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, right? So inherent in it. Now, it's interesting. Again, there've been in other quote unquote religions things taken from Torah, right? Obviously, taken out of context, other things. This part of the Torah, no one has touched. Right? It defies logic. 3,200 years, no one's ever tried to make a claim that there's a God or a being or whatever that's come to a nation and spoken to them. Never happened in history, right? So God assures Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't really want to go to Egypt. He doesn't really want to take on the mantle. God assures them. He says, don't worry. He says, you have nothing to worry about. I'm going to back you up myself, right? So we see God says he is believed, right? He's believed in my house, and God gives a stamp of approval. Nobody can deny the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the problem is the Christians will come and say, well, look, you got Jeremiah chapter 30, you got the new covenant, right? But there's inherent dislogic over here. I don't know if dislogic is a word. It's illogical. Why is it illogical? Because Moshe Rabbeinu said himself, God told me, you're not allowed to add or subtract, right? So they say, but a new covenant, right? The hint to JC, that's what it's talking about. It's going against the old covenant. But how can you go against the old covenant if the fact is Moshe Rabbeinu can't add or subtract? And all prophecy goes through Moshe Rabbeinu. You have to adhere to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah from God, and you can't go against it, right? Okay, so they're misinformed. They interpret it the way they do, etc. But Moshe Rabbeinu is no more than a scribe, right? So now, so that essentially is one very, very strong proof that you have divine revelation. You have the fact that God comes to Moshe in front of everybody, and no one else can make such a claim because no one else ever has eyewitnesses. Now, I'll mention one other thing here, or maybe a few other things here. Another idea is that God says to Moshe, you know what? I know the Jewish people, they're not gonna want to believe me, right? They'll tell me, well, we don't believe the God you said, the God you talk about, is going to take us out of Egypt. Now, why should God have been upset? Doesn't he know? Doesn't he know, past, present, future? Why is he going to be upset? He tells Moshe, I don't understand. He says, you do what I tell you to do, right? He does a stick trick, throws down the stick, turns into a snake, whatever. He says, don't worry. You will win them over. You will show beyond the shadow of a doubt, right? He should have just told Moshe, listen, I am the Lord your God. I can do all these things. I'm above nature. I'm below nature. I'm everywhere. What in the world are you worried about? You're worried about these idiots not going to listen? Come on, right? What are you talking about? God could have told Moshe, just listen to what I tell you, right? But that's not what he says. He agrees with this claim, right? He agrees with Moshe's claim, and he says, okay, I'm going to come to you from the clouds. I'm going to speak to you in front of everybody, right? And that is never going to change, right? That 100% is never going to change. So God's not interested, give a new religion, new prophecy. He's not going to whisper in someone's ear, right? He's going to do it in a way where there's no question, where there's no doubt, right? The question is going to be, why would he hide? Why would he give him 50%? Why would he give him 20%? Like in these other, so-called religions. Now, the obligations, that we have, the obligations that we have also, we have to think about. If you ask a person in general, you're going to say, do you believe in God? Some say yes, some say no, some say, really not sure, all kinds of different opinions, right? Science will say, you got to show it. It's like Aristotle said, if I can't see it, I can't feel it, then it's not real, right? Etc. So a person says maybe 70%, he said it, maybe 60%, maybe I do believe it, maybe I don't believe it. The Torah doesn't say to believe in God. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah tells me I have to know that he exists. I have to know he gave the Torah. I have to know he's the boss. I have to know everything goes through him, right? So if you go to Exodus chapter 6, he says, you shall know I am your God. Not that I think, not that there's a doubt, not that like it's a 5-year option to renew. You will know. This is something you have to do. It says in Exodus chapter 17, you shall know I am your God. Exodus 31, it's a sign between you and me for all generations. So in other words, it's not about faith. It's about knowledge. It's about showing, right? Belief, we do have an obligation to believe in God, whatever, but you have to know. You have to know he exists. It says you shall know today. And return, Deuteronomy chapter 4. Return into your heart that God is the only one. There was no other one before. There'll never be another one, right? We also see from the kings and the prophets, See, the prophet Ezekiel says, no, I'm your God. So says Jeremiah. Again, these are prophets. Prophets have to go through Moshe Rabbeinu, meaning they have to uphold what Moshe Rabbeinu says. If they don't uphold what Moshe Rabbeinu says, they're declared a false prophet obligation for the death penalty, etc., because you can't have false prophets running around because they'll destroy Judaism, as we've seen by a number of false prophets. You got Joshua chapter 4, same thing. You shall know the nation, right? The nation shall know that the hand of God has done this, right? Again, you shall know and not believe. Whatever, a lot of other examples, as well. The prophet Isaiah says in chapter 43, verse 10, right? You should know and believe me, understand, I am your God, there was no other God. Now, the irony, so to speak, is all the other nations and all the other so-called religions, definitely agree these are prophets. These are prophets of God. So if these are prophets of God, they are speaking because God spoke to them. And if God spoke to them and said, I am the only God, there is no other one but me, what do you do with that? I mean, I guess you can mangle it. You could, misinterpret it. You can say, no, they're other gods. Well, if they're prophets giving over prophecy by, again, this is logic 101. God spoke to them, came in a vision. Moshe Rabbeinu, we spoke to word for word, right? God spoke to everyone else through a vision. They lost all their senses. By losing all their senses, God gave them the interpretation of what they're supposed to give over, whether it's something for that generation, something for that specific time, whatever it is, but everybody agrees. There is no disagreement that they're prophets. So by process of deduction, if they are prophets and they are prophets of God, God is telling them there's only one. There's only one of me. And you have to follow what he says. Right? So over here, if God orders me and everyone here to know him, we have to understand he is the boss. He gave us the Torah. Now, the problem is, I know I'm running out of time here. The problem is that you can't smell it. You can't go through the five senses and say, okay, I know God by sense of smell, by sense of, hearing, or whatever, right? They help me function. They help me operate every day. But how in the world, maybe that's a proof against, right? In other words, maybe Aristotle, God forbid, is right. And Aristotle's going to say, come on, I don't sense it, right? Not by my intellect, not by my ears, not by my sense of smell, taste, none of these things. Now, so how can we answer that? Very simple. There are many things in life that we trust 100%, even though it can't be proven with the five senses, right? What's an obvious example? Radio waves. Radio waves everywhere in our lives. Everything, right, is affected by radio waves. Get in a plane, right? You get in a plane, you land on the other side of the world, plane finds its destination, all these things, through radar, whatever. Can you prove with the five senses? Can't prove it, right? It's new technology, right? Definitely new technology, right? But everyone understands that there's such a thing. Imagine just like now, right? I'm sitting here in Israel, you're in Texas, other people, all over the world listening, right? I say something, all of a sudden, magically, through the art of, video and everything else, it works, right? It definitely works. But, so you're going to say, well, that I can see, right? That sort of I can sense. Okay, maybe not a clear-cut proof. But in general, for radio waves, and other things, even if I don't sense it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? There could be a, Jewish kid in Russia in the days of communism, and, and what happens? Teacher already said we don't believe in religion. Says we're communists because you can't prove it by the five senses. So what do they hold? If you can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. So comes along this little Jewish kid, comes up and he says, okay, you don't have any intelligence. So how do you have the nerve, right? He says, okay, you're an idiot. I sense that. So what? So what if you don't sense it, right? If you don't sense it, it doesn't mean it doesn't it doesn't exist, right? They'll claim, okay, you have to show it to me. So if we can show it in many other ways, just because I can't necessarily sense it doesn't mean it's not true, right? We saw that by the world of design, right? That's clear. We could use that as an example. You see what goes on in the world of nature. That's design, right? No question. You can't point to the body where there's another thing. What about intelligence, right? That was the point here with this Russian kid. He says, what about intelligence? Can you prove intelligence? You look at the brain, imagine, somebody dies. Okay, they cut open his head, they take out his brain, and say, okay, this is the exact spot where his intelligence is. The brain, extremely complex. We understand how complex the brain is, right? But again, it could take billions and billions of laptops. You put all these supercomputers together. They don't come to one billionth of what the brain what the brain does, and how it works, and how intellect works. Can I pinpoint intellect? Can I put it on my fingers? Oh, this is what it is. This is the part. This is, you can't do that, right? But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It certainly doesn't exist, and everything else in the world, everything else in the world has to have a purpose, right? There has to be a purpose in creation. Animals, they have their purpose. There's nothing in the world, there's nothing in the world that doesn't have a purpose, right? So creation is extremely sophisticated, and we don't know everything. There's no question about that. But the way things work, the way we understand things, Chochmah, Bina, and Das. Chochmah, intelligence. Bina means wisdom. And Das means the ability to translate what you learn, what you gain. With the knowledge. So really, there are three different things, but there are three building blocks for a person to be able to navigate this world, right? And exactly how we're supposed to do that, and how we're supposed to know that, and all these things, goes to show that these things cannot be haphazard, right? It's like radio waves. If I can't prove it, even if I can't prove it, and I can't sense it, we know it exists. Before they discovered DNA, and discovered other things, they believe beyond the shadow of a doubt, this is the nucleus of a cell. This is what it does. This is, all these things. But people took it as a leap of faith because, of course, that's science, right? Science can be proven. These other things can't necessarily be proven, right? Even if it can't be proven necessarily scientifically, which we did bring out the last few weeks, that certainly we can show, right? But even if you want to say it can't be proven 100%, scientifically, when you put everything together and how the human body works and intellect or whatever, right? And you say, okay, how do I pinpoint this and pinpoint that? The argument against is, well, I don't sense it. Doesn't matter if you don't sense it, right? This is how it works. This is how it operates. Doesn't matter whether you sense it or not, right? So, so in a nutshell, what we have, at least to this point, we'll go, I guess, a little more through science and more things direct and prophecy and other things that has to show, beyond the shadow of a doubt that no one could have made such a statement, except for God. But, when you go back to Mount Sinai, and you go back to the psyche of, of God and Moshe Rabbeinu and what God does and how God sets him up, and that whole thing, an eyewitness account is 100% absolutely crucial, in order to understand that this has never been duplicated in the history of man, and it can't be something that's made up for one very simple reason. Because if Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to succeed, he would have made it very easy, right? If he wanted to, be a fake, give me 5 commandments. But we have eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses passed down generation to generation through many different mitzvahs, many different things. I guess that some of these things, will show in the upcoming weeks, where there's no possible way any human being could have known.
Right.
That's it.
Hey, it's been stirring up a lot of fun commenting and stuff in chat. YouTube chat.
Any trolls? Come on, anyone trolling?
Yeah. One particular one, but it wasn't really so much. It was actually in the context of your show, but it was someone who doesn't believe that the Torah was given by God. I think it was completely made up. That Moses was a made up figure. It was only spoken of to other people, and Egyptian language is 7,000 years old versus the Hebrew language. Blah blah blah. And so I've been listening to you and commenting a lot throughout the chat. So interesting show for sure. But yeah, so I guess we're definitely out of time. There's no doubt about that. So
I got more time. I can still talk. Come on.
Well, we're gonna make it multiple shows. Remember, instead of doing it all in one show.
I know. Yeah, I forgot that. That's true. Okay.
So that's good. That's good. And maybe we'll add if in your discussion for next week if you want, because I actually wound up blocking this guy because he was just going on and on and on, and he was kind of making suggestions that we were not correctable because we're just so up there, and I'm thinking. Because we were acting the same way he was acting, and so anyway,
I am up there. That is true, but
but the point is, I mean, he brought up some interesting topics. I'd like to he, she, whoever it was. It'd be nice to bring those up in there. I'll see if I can figure out how to keep track of these. So, but yeah, that's pretty much our show for tonight. So thank you guys for tuning in. It was definitely been a good show for sure, and I look forward to the next one as well. So, I gotta get this thing turned back on. So, guys, you can find Rabbi Coffman on Facebook at Orthodox. Let me just pull it back up.
Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism.
I'm gonna put it back up just for a minute, just so people see it one more time. There you go. And, there you go. So we're here every Monday, 1 p.m., unless something comes up, of course. So there you go, folks. Been a good show. So we'll see you soon. Rabbi, you have a great week, and we'll see everybody later.
Too.
Take care. Peace.
All right. Stay safe.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye. Thanks.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק